Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and poll results released yesterday showed a worrying picture for the voting intentions of the public in the event that a general election is called fairly soon. Now, when we look at polls like this, I always have to caution regarding two important factors to consider. First of all, polls like this aim to discover the share of the popular vote, but we do not use proportional representation in Westminster elections, so it doesn't translate into a share of the seats. A party whose support is in pockets around the country is likely to win their seats by more comfortable margins, but will get fewer seats compared to a party with the same share that is more evenly distributed through the country. They will win more seats, but just by smaller margins. The second thing to consider is that we are not in the middle of a general election campaign. Campaigning hasn't actually started for a general election, and campaigning does often change voting behaviours. If it didn't, parties wouldn't spend as much as they think they can get away with on it. So the results could well change if we actually did enter a general election. Now, I will also have to apologise to nationalist supporters, but SNP and Plaid were probably in that other category there. Not my poll, I didn't make this decision. That being said, the figures would have to change a great deal indeed for a general election in 2019, something Corbyn says that he is desperate for the Conservatives and Labour to emerge as the two largest parties. That's not what those figures are suggesting. And the same poll page did show how voting intentions sort of changed during 2010, but the end result actually reset back to how it was pre the major campaigning. So I suppose it's not always the case that campaigning changes much, I suppose, if all parties do it equally well. Anyone believe that Labour is going to campaign as well as their rivals? No? I've said it before anyway, but the best I could hope for in a general election, if it occurred this year, was a Labour Liberal Democrat coalition government. But these figures suggest that actually it could end up being the Liberal Democrats who get the prime ministerial position in such a coalition. It might also see Nigel Farage as leader of the opposition. Ugh. At this point, not only would politics have run completely mad, but it could break both Labour and the Conservatives for the foreseeable future, maybe permanently depending on how they reacted. Bear in mind how the voters for the largest parties are broken up. There are essentially three types as far as I see it. The first one are committed supporters of the party. These are likely to be paying members if they can afford it. They will always vote Labour in a general election or Conservative, their Conservative members and so on. Two, you have the swing voters who will decide which party's policies they like more and vote for them. It can switch from party to party throughout their lives. And three, people who want to kick the other party out. There are people who vote for either Labour or the Conservatives, not because they approve of them, but because they consider them the lesser of two evils. What they're really doing is using their vote against the other party rather than for the one they're using it on. Now, the committed supporters of both parties are not great in number either. If you were to add up all the committed supporters of Labour and the Conservatives, it wouldn't even amount to 500,000 people. The bulk of voters vote for one of the big parties because most people in the UK want to put their votes to a party that might actually carry out its manifesto. As such, you may find that there are people who prefer the Green Party manifesto, but they don't believe the Green Party can form a government, so that manifesto will never see the light of day, so they vote for a party that has the closest fit to them, that could form a government and therefore get that legislation through. People don't believe that the Lib Dems or the Green Party can form a government, so they don't get as many votes. But in these turbulent political times where the leaders of the largest parties are basically ignoring their own voters so obnoxiously, we could indeed see hitherto minor parties making major gains in a general election. After all, traditional Labour voters, who are not necessarily committed Labour members, have already given Labour a kick in the local elections and the European elections. The same applies to Conservative voters. The message has not been heeded. So the next step is inevitable. Once you have the notion that, say, the Liberal Democrats could form a government, then the next general election could see current positions reversed. If voters now see them as a realistic prospect for government, all of a sudden a lot of people who prefer their manifesto will now vote for them because it fulfills both criteria. They approve of the manifesto and they have a realistic chance of getting it through. If Labour don't change their tune bloody quickly, that could easily happen. And I'd hold out no hope that Jeremy Corbyn will heed the message. Like most people blinkered about their own politics, he's happy enough to use poll results when it suits him, like he did in the email to me a few days ago, but will dismiss them when it doesn't. Given that he hasn't changed his tune after the disastrous May elections, don't hold out any hope that he'll do so, even if his prize of a general election, which, given what I said in the video earlier today, could indeed be a realistic prospect by the end of the year. And yet, I still keep seeing reports that Corbyn is now backing a public vote. No, he isn't. Not when you actually see what he's said. He still says that he'd only use it to oppose no deal, but that a Labour government would take the UK out of the EU. In fact, the anti-Remain rhetoric just keeps increasing. The Shadow Attorney General, another of his mouthpieces, said, I think it was yesterday, that if a public vote were held, Labour might actually support Leave this time. And what if the distribution of seats ended up being such that no two parties could form a majority, even in coalition? You would have the most divided parliament ever, much more so than the current one. With no overall winner, the country could have effectively put its hands up and said, we don't bloody know who should be in charge. But let's just pretend that the proposed vote share did translate into distribution in Parliament. And I note again that it wouldn't be for the two reasons I already gave, because, you could actually see a government emerging, however, if it did translate that way. The only way to get a majority, and it would be a slightly larger one than the current Conservative government, would be a coalition between the Liberal Democrats, who would occupy number 10, Labour and the Green Party. These parties have enough in common on enough domestic policies, though Labour would have to get behind a public vote at least, or get shot of the guy who refuses. What would then happen at the next general election would depend a great deal on how both Labour and the Conservatives, who would still be able to come back from this, conduct themselves over that coming Parliament. If they re-engage with their voters, and not so much the extremists in their membership, with new leaders, then they would surely come back. If not, if they stay on the extreme wings of their party, then it could be political oblivion if their current rivals adapt quickly to their newfound powers. So let me know what you think in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, and until next time, I'll see you later.